but we're going to get started. Okay, so you should be here because you want to hear an IEP walkthrough for our summer blitz to get 1 hour of credit towards your sketchies. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you made it. Hopefully you went through a sign-in sheet process. If not, I'm going to pop that in the chat, and then there will be a QR code and a couple slides if you need to scan that. That way you get your credit for being here. Okay, so let's get started with our IEP walkthrough. Well, first I'm going to start with this land acknowledgement. Wayne RESA leadership worked in conjunction with local Indigenous leaders to develop a land acknowledgement in order to recognize the fact that our campus resides on the ancestral homeland of many Indigenous peoples. The development of the statement went through a process both internally and with tribal elders to make sure that it was respectful of their lands. So I'm going to have you listen to that. It's just presented as a thought piece.
We collectively acknowledge that Wayne RESA occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe. The people of the Peoria, Fox, Wyandot, Miami, and Mississauga tribes also made this region their home. Wayne RESA resides on land ceded in the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. These lands continue to be the homeland of many Indigenous people. Through these words of acknowledgement, we seek to reaffirm and respect their contemporary and ancestral ties to the land and their contributions. Additionally, Wayne RESA recognizes and commits to ongoing intercultural learning through our diverse local and regional Indigenous communities. We collectively acknowledge.
Thank you. Additionally, those of us in a special ed department try to use this poor accessibility commitment when making our presentations, and I present it to you as something you'll consider when making documents or presentations for your staff, for your students. It's a learning process. This slideshow probably has some issues that I need to fix, but I wanted to present that to you as an option. And even though our time is short together, I was hoping that we could establish these working agreements, that we know that special ed is always changing, that we're always learning. There's no finish line to our work, but that when we know better, we do better. So just trust that process, even when doing something like writing an IEP. Hopefully you learn a few little tips or tricks today that help you write a better IEP. If you have the opportunity to share, I hope that you share from your space, speaking from yourself, not somebody else's story. And if we do have time to come off mute, balance your speaking and listening. So making sure that you're like, why am I talking right now? And not just managing our airtime if we have an opportunity to have dialogue. And then also consider what's confidential in the sense that if there are stories shared here today, don't share what was said, but you can share what was learned. So some people say that what is shared here stays here, what is learned here leaves. And again, if you haven't had an opportunity to sign in, that is the QR code to take you to the sign-in sheet to get you your credits. This session is based on the MiStar IEP. So if you are not a MiStar user, it's okay, because IEPs are IEPs. So what things we talk about, you should be able to apply to your IEP. You know, things are going to change in our forms. That always happens. If you need blank forms to either take notes on or just have, that QR code will take you to that double secret site that the password is special education, all one word, all lowercase, and so is the username. So that's where you can get blank copies to take notes on. This session, of course, is not going to guarantee compliance, but it will help you get there. But above all else, follow your district's policies and procedures. So if I say something that is a little different than what your special ed director or supervisor coordinator might be telling you, there might be a good reason for that. Districts might have a reason that they're doing that procedure. So just ask that question and be curious about that difference rather than saying somebody's doing something wrong. So that is important because sometimes we get calls that say, hey, Angie said this, and I might have, but in your district, it might be a little bit different for some reason or another. Okay, so I'm Angie. I spent 18 years in a local district as both a resource program provider and as a teacher consultant, and I've been here at Wayne RESA since 2023. I live in the general supervision and accountability section of the special ed department, and really that's just all compliance, monitoring state complaints. But the fun stuff I get to do is like resource program trainings and co-teaching. So we have like the role of the special educator coming up. That's a 2-day offering that happens twice a year. We go kind of in depth about IEP writing and scheduling and just how to be a resource provider or special ed provider. And then co-teaching, we call it 101 on the side, but intro to co-teaching, secondary co-teaching, and a couple different offerings that maybe I will see you at or I have seen you at before. All right, let's get a vibe check. In the chat, how are you feeling today? Put what number, llama, alpaca, I'm not sure. So if you, in the chat, just type what number you're feeling today. Some of us, students are back to school already. Some of us, they start next week, and some of us get a couple weeks yet until we have to deal with the students. So how are you feeling in the chat? And since there's only a few of us, we're all over the place. Does anyone feel brave to come off to mute? Maybe one or two people just say which number you are and maybe a brief explanation. Somebody said they're not ready to go back tomorrow. And I don't know if I can see all of you, so just come off mute if you like to share.
All right. Am I
Hey,
on?
Tim.
Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't hear
Yeah.
you, but I'm wondering if that's my problem and not your problem.
Oh,
Can anybody
somebody
hear
said
Tim?
someone's hearing me.
I can hear you.
All right. Well, I did number 3 because I'm going to a different school this year, going from elementary to high school. So kind of looking forward to it. That's it. Number 3.
I'm so sad. I can't hear anything you said. Well, that's going to make the rest of this very interesting, isn't it?
There you go. It's in the chat.
I see it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Wow. Big shift. That's a big change. Good luck with that. All right. Well, we'll just use the chat then since I can't hear you guys. Like I said, I'm in a new space, so I didn't practice in here very much. I thought I had it, and then a reboot happened. So there you go. Okay, cool. All right. Well, hopefully those of you who have some time left enjoy every minute of it. And those of you who are back, I hope you've had a beautiful first couple days and it goes well. All right. So, like we said, we're going to go through the IEP today. So hopefully you have a better understanding in each section so that you can write more thoughtful and compliant IEPs because each of our kids are unique. So their IEPs should not look the same. Another reminder, compliance is what we call the floor. It protects kids, it gives them what they are entitled to, but best practice is really where you want to live by writing more robust IEPs that really address students' needs. So the IEP actually starts before you even get into the paperwork. At that meeting, what are some best practices before you get started? You want to engage in some friendly conversation with the parents. No one likes walking into a room where there's no conversation, it's awkward, it's tense. Break that up a little bit, lighten the mood, have those conversations. Don't forget to introduce people. Don't assume that everybody knows who everybody else is, or maybe they know their face and maybe their name, but they don't know their title or why they're there or what their role is going to be in the IEP. So it's helpful to do introductions. Have an agenda. Yes, you can use the IEP paperwork to just go boom, 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 boom through it, but there might be other things you need to talk about, like an upcoming field trip and how you're going to handle that, or something, or maybe there's an MDR also. So have an agenda about the order of events. And then what happens if there's a disagreement? How will that issue be solved? So identifying what that problem-solving method will be. Will it be we're going to talk it out, or we're going to let our principal make the final decision, or a special ed administrator make the final decision? Maybe not always needed, but you know which IEPs might be contentious. So it's good to identify that up front so everybody has that same understanding. Okay, now the paperwork. It is important that when you are presenting an IEP to the families, that you present it in draft form. So thankfully, we have that watermark option in MiStar to put on our paperwork. A lot of people will put that on every page except the front page so that you can have your signatures on there without the draft watermark. So that's important. Have your signatures on a clean page without that draft. Some teams like to project their paperwork if you have that technology, but having that draft form allows you to create this program plan with the parent and not in front of them. They are a member of the IEP team, so they need to have that meaningful participation. So you can't just present them with, here it is, and be done in 15 minutes. Now, you might be able to be done in 15 minutes if you have a good relationship, but otherwise, you're working through each part in each section. Think about if you're going to, I don't know, a really important meeting like financial or house or something, and they're speaking a different language. So when people slow things down and work with you, it just feels better. At the top of the slide, it might be very small for you to read, but I suggest avoid using page numbers when printing your IEPs, because sometimes you print the draft, it's 16 pages, and then you make some changes on a couple pages, and then instead of reprinting the whole thing, you only want to reprint those couple pages because you only have 50 sheets of paper a week or whatever it might be. And then your numbers don't match, and that can look a little confusing and wonky to somebody looking at the IEP paperwork later. That might be just a style preference, but it's just one of those things that if you don't need to raise a red flag, you don't need to raise a red flag about your paperwork. Of course, the demographic information you might not be able to change, but please check it with your parents and families to make sure it's accurate, and then you can tell the correct people to change that information later. Those most recent dates, try not to leave any of those blank. I know some of you are getting students who haven't been in school for a couple years, so the paperwork is absolutely missing or missing information. So do what you can to fill in all of that information. The read, of course, can be blank if this is their initial IEP, but you probably had one, and so you can put that information in there. And it shouldn't be any older than 3 years, because you should be considering whether you're going to evaluate every 3 years, but your MET date could be older than 3 years because you may have rolled a read, as some people call it, or decided there was a sufficient amount of data to say the student is still eligible, so that date might be older. Your initial 3-year date should be no older than 3 years. And then this last one, the previous notice of FAPE, that's when the notice of FAPE went home to the parents and it was received, not necessarily always the same date as when the IEP was held. And sometimes that can trick people or trip them up and have them be the same, or they're confused by why that's different. So that might be a different date than you're anticipating. For the purpose of the meeting, check all that apply. It could be an initial. Those are for your babies getting identified for the first time, or as we know in Michigan, if we're moving in from out of state with an IEP, we're considered an initial in Michigan. Even if I was a Michigan student 2 years ago, went to Arizona, and then came back to Michigan, I'm now an initial. graduation or age 26, if they're graduating in that year for you guys in high school, or your transition plan. I will not be covering a whole lot about transition today because that itself could be at least another hour or more. So I will share some resources later where you can find some information about that. Your participants and your parent contact. Generally, I know that we're calling or we're emailing a parent to say, hey, does this work for you? And in the behind the scenes, you're talking to all of the different folks about what days work for them. But for that first line that says that they've been invited and explained the purpose, I'd like to see the invitation, the formal invitation date there, because that has all the information on it. And it must show ample notice. Some districts will say that it has to go out 7 days before the meeting, 5 days before the meeting, 30 days before the meeting, whatever it is, it has to show some ample time before the actual meeting. And then that follow-up could be your email reminder, your phone call reminder. You don't want those to be the same date generally. You need them to be staggered to show that you're in communication with the parent. And of course, you're keeping a contact log in your files to show all those other times that you were contacting families. For participants, of course, you have to have everybody that says they're required there. Now, if somebody's signing in multiple places, that's okay. Some districts will say no more than 2, and I'd say that's probably a good thing, that if you're acting as the Met rep and the special ed provider, that's probably good, but you don't want to do district rep as well. Have multiple people there. But if you are acting in 2 roles, make sure you sign both lines. I was in the state complaint where that happened, where a TC was acting as the special ed provider as well, but only signed in the one place. So it looked like they were missing their special ed provider. Another thing about participants, on your invitation, if a person is not listed on the invitation, they should not be listed as a participant on your IEP. If something changes in between when you first sent that invitation out and the IEP date, make a new invitation, add that new person on there. Make sure it's okay with the parent and let them know if they're going to be there. It's really about informing them. And of course, the excusal forms, we have the parent and district agreement that attendance not necessary, or the agreement on excusal prior to the meeting. Just making sure that your excusal form matches which one of these you check, and that's happening before the meeting. Typically, we want to give the parents a good heads up that so-and-so is not going to be there, but here's their information and we've got it covered, or so-and-so is going to be in place with them. I like to remind people, don't finalize your IEP in MiStar until you have all your signatures, especially if you're using an electronic signature program, because sometimes people slow you up because they're taking their time signing. So just making sure you get those signatures and then finalize. Eligibility. I don't know if MiStar lets you do this anymore, but back in the day, it used to let you pick both boxes that the student was eligible and ineligible, but you really want to only pick out one, okay? So if the Met recommended the student is eligible for multiple areas, that's great. They make recommendations for eligibility. The IEP team determines eligibility. So if we're going to say, yes, they're eligible, their primary is ASD, then we're going to check that box. We're not going to say, but we didn't choose LD or SLI or something like that. You're just going to leave the ineligible box blank, and that's okay. That fill from Met option is there for you. That's very helpful. Of course, if you did have a Met or an you'd have it attached here. And then if they're not eligible, you check that box, and this is where the IEP ends. You go on to the notice page that says they're ineligible for FAPE. There shouldn't be anything else filled out in the IEP. But if they are eligible, of course, you're going to go on. And then the graduation, I don't know for sure. This screenshot is from the forms from a couple years ago. This bottom line is crossed out because we do not want you to use that. It may have been removed. But if your student's going to graduate in this school year, you have to still have an IEP for them by their annual date, even if they're going to graduate 3 days later. You still have to keep up with those due dates, if you will. All right, the PLAF, the big section of the IEP, right? This is where the heart of the IEP is. We know it has 2 sections, kind of, if you will. We've got these factors to consider first. Essentially, you don't want to leave any box blank. You got to write something. Anywhere, you don't want to leave it blank unless it has a box that says considered but not selected. So in the strengths, you want to think about academics, social, behavior, school-based stuff. It's nice to say Angie's a nice kid. She has a lot of friends, but tell me what those skills are that make me have a lot of friends. What makes me nice? What are my academic strengths? Ask the parents sometimes for input here as well. There's a neurodiversity checklist out in the world that is very cool to use for this section. I'm going to drop the link to what I have in the chat, and I hope that works for you. But that's a great way to get strengths for a student. Input from the parent or student. Sometimes they're not there, and you're like, well, what do I put there? So you could write simply, parent wasn't present, unable to obtain their input. Maybe you called them a couple days ago and you got their input because you knew they weren't going to be there and you couldn't find another mutually agreeable time. So per the phone conversation on such and such date, and write something there just so to show that they were participating in the meeting. And also I like to tell parents, if something comes up later, a couple pages into the IEP, we can go back and put it on that part of the IEP. It's okay. Results of the recent evaluations. There's a lot of data sources you can use here. Some people put a very short synopsis of MET information, like if it's not a 3-year, but a couple years ago, or last year or the year before, they had some information that they want to share there. Informal standardized assessments, so maybe like NWA scores, iReady, MSTEP, if it's available. Some people will write progress report data here, like goal number 1, their baseline was here, they're currently here, and then that can be folded into the next part of the PLAF, and you see some other options there. A lot of times people feel like they're duplicating their work in an IEP, and if it is in one place, you should be covered, but again, that's basic bare bones compliance. So sometimes having a more robust, repetitive IEP is actually a better IEP. So it's here, and then you'll see it again in the PLAF statement for each area. The special factors, this is another one where we'll check the boxes, but we hope to see another statement somewhere else in the IEP. So we know that the first 2 section boxes have to be checked for each student with an IEP to discuss their and consider the communication needs and the assistive technology needs. Now, if there is a need, we're going to write that somewhere else in the IEP that they needed, either communication PLAF, goals and objectives, services, program, supplementary aids and services. And if there's no other, we considered it, but there's no needs, you're going to put it on that notice of fate page and the options considered but not selected. So it kind of has to live in 2 places there. And one of those that I think is interesting and underutilized is that 3rd box where it's part of the 4 that we only consider as appropriate, but the behavior interventions and supports. That box gets missed a lot. If students have social emotional PLAFs, they might just have a behavior plan in their supplementary aids and services. They might have a little bit of social work in their programs and services. So that box should be checked and then elsewhere noted. One other thing that might be good is, say Angie just got suspended for a fight. She doesn't normally get suspended, but she did. Something was going on. We found out, there was something bad going on at home, so she's really upset. A kid made a comment and she went off. Not necessarily something that needs a behavior plan, but her IEP ended up happening a couple weeks later. We talked about it. We're going to check this box. And then on the notice page, say, due to the recent suspension, the team determined that or discussed a behavior plan for Angie, but it wasn't needed because this was a one-time thing, and we'll continue to watch to see if there's any upcoming needs. But again, that's something that gets underutilized. We won't go through each PLAF section. We'll go through a few for little highlights of points and tips there, but essentially everything on this page in the blue can be applied to any of the areas of educational performance on the PLAF page. For your baseline data, it's current, it's where we are right now. This is a snapshot of who the student is right now. So we need current data, and we need that data to be in numbers and explain it in a way that's understandable to the parents, giving it meaning. So we're not just going to throw a list of scores because Angie said we need to have numbers. We're going to explain what those numbers mean. It's also important to include those observations from the parents or the student if they're able to give that information, and the teachers. And here's another spot where your progress report data can come in. Angie was working on this goal, and now she's at this level. So it leads us to the next skill, and she's at this level. And there I've got my baseline data for my new goal that I'm going to write. Sometimes we see only those standardized test scores in there, and those are your dipstick. That's your, where are they at that moment? And you can't give them that often. So they're really hard to show that growth. Again, baseline data for goals and objectives should be present. Something that might be a new stretch for you. What data do you have to support the need for supplementary aids and services? Why does Angie need that extra time in reading, or that text to speech, or something else? What data supports that need? Either because I'm doing poorly on something, or when I'm given that supplementary aid and service, it increases my performance to a certain level. The impact statement says, okay, Angie's got this. That's her baseline data. So what? What does that look like? What is she unable to do? Or, how does it impact her? So write it in a way that if someone's observing the student, they can see how that disability affects them. Sometimes people just write a boilerplate statement that says Angie's learning disability makes it difficult for her to access the curriculum. Fine, explain what it is about the learning disability that makes it difficult for Angie to access the curriculum. Give me more, explain it out. Take credit for all the stuff that the team is doing, and tell the story of all the supports the student needs, and why. So then that trickles down. It's kind of like a waterfall. We have our baseline and goes into our impact. Our impact tells us, okay, so what does the student need? You're going to identify those accommodations, those supplementary aids and services. You're going to identify areas for instruction. This is where our specially designed instruction starts to creep into the IEP. So we're putting out there that Angie needs to work on phonics or comprehension questions or something like that. You're talking about the skills that she needs to develop. Sometimes districts will say, don't list services in there, like she needs a resource program or speech and language or social work. And then other times directors say they want to see it in there. So again, that's a spot where your district is going to lead you to how they want to see that written. And again, if something isn't needed, even though you've got data in the baseline, you've got an impact there, but in this area of reading, maybe Angie's disability doesn't affect her that much that she requires anything. So it's okay to say, even though Angie's got a specific learning disability in math, it doesn't affect, it affects her. She doesn't require any goals or supplementary aids and services at this time in this area. And then that, of course, should end up on your notice page in options considered but not selected. You don't want to just throw a supplementary aid and service at somebody just because. So, and it's okay to have data in there about reading just to kind of show that this where the student's at, to provide a full look at the student. Social emotional behavior, observational data, like maybe you're on task, off task. point sheet summary. Those are places to get information to add data to the baseline. If there is a behavior plan, what are those target behaviors that they're working on? So what's those occurrence? How frequent or intense are they? Are there any updated rating scales? And again, behavior specifically can get into reading and math and everything. So you might want to add some of the same information into other areas of the PLAF. And anything listed in that resulting needs section should be transferred to the supplementary aids grid later in the IEP using the same words preferably. So if you call it extended time in the resulting needs, I don't want to see it called extra time in the grid. I think I can make the connection, but let's make it super clear for our parents that those are exactly the same things. This was something new that I learned close to the end of last school year when working with our nurses. If a student has one of those individual healthcare plans, just like a behavior plan, those can be modified outside of the IEP, but maybe we're listing it in the medical section of the PLAF. So this statement is there as a way to say, hey, yeah, the student needs the care plan, but we're going to review and modify it outside of the IEP, meaning we don't have to open an IEP every time we want to make a change to their healthcare plan. Medical baseline data, you can have your diagnosis, what medications, any information from outside reports, parent inputs. Impact might be your side effects and those symptoms that they receive. And resulting needs could still be supplementary aids and services, and maybe some goals if they need to learn some skills to manage what's going on as well. Like I said, we won't spend a lot of time here, but if students are turning 16 within the IEP year, we need to begin that transition planning for them. So you'll check that as appropriate. Course of study for high school. If our students are not high school age, it's okay to check NA. Again, this might be a spot where your district's like, no, you need to make a determination. But if you have NA because the student's in 3rd grade, it's not going to be a major compliance issue. However, from a best practice issue, you don't want to just gleam over this. You want to talk about what the differences are here for your parents so that if anything ever were to change for the student, it's not a surprise party when that change happens. So even if it's not an idea that you think eventually Angie might need a course of study for certificate of completion, talk about the differences so they understand that there's different paths for our students. And then maybe they can ask questions about those later, but nothing else, nothing horrible to say they're on their way to a high school diploma and then they get to 9th grade and they're like, no. So having those conversations early and often at just read this part of the IEP and explain it, even if they're not there age-wise yet. Least restrictive environment. So this was there before that new box showed up last summer. So I just tell people, talk about LRE. Don't skip this section. Tell parents what it means. Goals and objectives, of course, come on the next page. We'll talk about those in a second. But some districts say each IEP must have 2 goals with 2 objectives each. And we'll talk a little bit about goals next. But progress reports or reporting progress are concurrent with the report cards. That means if Angie gets a report card on the quarterly, then Angie gets a progress report on her IEP goals quarterly. The IEP team can decide on a different schedule, but at the very least, they're required to go out when the students get report cards. So this LRE box was new last year. And if you came last year, I didn't know about it until this training. So it's since have given some information about what needs to go there. So you're going to have that discussion about the rationale for programming and services outside of the gen ed, which is the LRE. Is it about the nature or severity of their disability? Is it about supplementary aids and services or modifications that can't be provided in the gen ed? If they're in a center-based programming, are we considering those harmful effects, away from gen ed or away from peers, long bus rides, whatever it can be. There's information about harmful effects out there. If need be, you can direct to other parts of the IEP, like if there's a nice statement in the PLAF, you can say, please see the PLAF. But I would say still consider adding anything to notice, like if you considered one program but didn't select it, or, a lesser restrictive program and didn't select it, adding that on the options to consider but not selected page. For resource program, you can just write something pretty generic up here. It doesn't have to go into all of those, but it's still another box not to leave blank. Okay, goals and objectives. This is the template that Wayne RESA has had for a while. It's based on the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education's requirement that goals and objectives are measurable with the current level of performance, identifying specific skill or set of skills to be taught and measured, what the outcome will be for them, and how we're going to measure them. So, that might sound like Angie can add 2 to 3-digit numbers using regrouping with 40% accuracy by August 23rd, 2027, given specialized instruction. In addition, Angie will add 2 3-digit numbers using regrouping with 90% accuracy as measured weekly by informal assessment and reported on quarterly. When thinking about writing your goals, you gotta stop and think, am I writing a goal that's for a skill or for an activity? A lot of times it's easy to write for activity. It's easier to collect data. It's easier to see. But what we want to be doing is writing goals that are skill-based, because it requires that ongoing instruction. That's where SDI lives. The student has to learn and do something with it. It's transferable to other subject areas or areas of their lives, and we're fostering that independence, like decoding or taking turns in a conversation. A lot of times this is easier with reading and math and those academic stuff, and a little bit harder with our behavior stuff. So another way to test and look at your goals is to think about the stranger test. So giving your goal or objective or IEP to somebody else and making sure they understand it. And then that person can plan based on it because it's so well written. I know you've received an IEP from somebody else and gone, I'm not sure what that goal means, or I'm not sure I understand what that PLAF is telling me. So just making sure you think about, is this understandable to other people? Did I say what I really meant to say? And then the dead man's test is really good for behavior goals, because the question posed is, can a dead man do it? So if the answer is yes, then it doesn't pass the test. It's not a good goal. It's not a skill. It might be an activity. Just think about behaviors like, I don't want Angie to hit her friends anymore. So my right goal, like, do not hit her friends. Well, dead man can do that because he can't move his arms. I don't want Angie to swear at her peers anymore. Angie will not swear. A dead man can do that because he can't speak. So again, flipping those to be more active to skills. Angie will use replacement activities when feeling, or strategies when feeling frustrated. Use kinder words, and you have to identify what kind words mean. But that's a way to check your goals and objectives. And I've mentioned specially designed instruction a couple times. This is an edited legal definition from the legalese, but basically, it's adapting the content, the methodology, and the delivery and instruction. It's what makes special ed special. What are you doing differently for your students in the special ed space, whether it's in the gen ed classroom, co-teaching, push-in, or in your classroom? It still has to be unique to their needs. Nobody else is getting that unique instruction. I mean, maybe somebody with similar goals and profile, but not the whole class. So SDI really is that bridge from our PLAF and our baseline to our outcome data of our goals and objectives. We progress monitor, and that informs our next PLAF, and we give more SDI to the student. A recent change was how the progress report looked. That happened last year sometime. And it was changed to make it easier for IEPs to be compliant. But there were some spots where people were confused. One is that progress schedule at the end. I want you to think evaluation schedule instead of progress schedule. That's how often are you taking information about how the student is doing, how you're measuring their progress. That you're doing that weekly, you're doing that every other week, maybe monthly. So over there, you shouldn't see the quarterly or the trimester or semester, because that's when their report cards might go home, and that's when they get their progress report. But how often are you checking for their progress? On the bottom, you're going to list the data at the progress report time, or if you want to put in a couple more, you have plenty more spaces there. And it's nice because you can type in letters or you can type in numbers. So depending on your grade or functioning level, that can be helpful. But you can see the goal still includes all of those pieces of measurability, and it's parsed out in the grid. So it's still recommended to do both. And then below that, what's not seen in this kind of blurry picture is the comment section for the progress report. Use that to explain the ability on those skills. Explain what that 75% means, or what is left that the student needs to learn to be able to get to their goal. I'm sorry, if their progress was like 60%, what do they need to get to their goal of 75%? And then we get to the supplementary aids and services grid. So what is unique to this student? Again, this might also you might want to think about past the stranger test. Does it make sense what I've written in this goal? Can somebody else take my place as a provider and know exactly what I meant that Angie needs as a support? You might hear people call these SAS or SAS now, because we like to shorten everything in special ed. But I like to think of it as reading like a sentence left to right, like what do they need, how often, and where. So just thinking that makes it really clear, because you're going to be tracking these. You want to be very specific. It's not a laundry list of things that might benefit the student, because a lot of things will benefit a lot of students, but the IEP is identifying what the student specifically needs based on their unique profile. So there needs to be data to back these up, and you're going to be tracking them to see if they're having the intended result. Never use, in that you can see in there, never use as needed or throughout the day. The state absolutely hates those. Another one that they don't like to see is on the student's request, or like per the parent's request or something like that. We shouldn't put the onus on the student to access what they need. We need to plan for it. These are some of those top 5 accommodations that we see, or 4, excuse me, that would need some more specificity. Extended time, how much extended time, not throughout the day. When explicitly do they need that extended time? And tell me more specifically what subjects, or or if there are other subjects they don't need it in there. Again, use of breaks at the student's request. No, let's plan for the unique situation when we know Angie needs that break. Is it a certain behavior she exhibits that we need to observe and then give her a break? Do we need to schedule them because we have data that says she needs one every hour for 5 minutes or something like that? And again, whatever's written here, the words you use should be about the same as what is in the PLAF. A legal case that came out, I don't know, last year or so, somebody graduated from high school unable to read, but they graduated, and it was said that their accommodations masked their inability to read. So we got to make sure that we're not hindering our students and supporting them too much, but supporting them so that they can learn. Again, if a behavior plan is written in there, you can write something like this, that we're going to do revisions outside of the IEP. If personal care services are checked, we need to make sure that we have that personal care service authorization form. We do not have time for a breakout room. Programs and services. When thinking about ranges for students, don't make them too wide. Make them so that they're unique to the student. That was something that when the state came through their LRE visit, they talked about, why does a student need a range of 3 to 5 hours a week, or 4 to 8? Like, is it 4 or is it 8? Let's be more specific, and not because staff wants to make it easier on them. What does the student need based on what's in their PLAF? And of course, programming is not contingent on staff availability. Like, oh, we'd give her speech, but we don't have speech or something like that, a speech path right now. So if she needs speech, you put it in there, and then you work with your administrators to figure out the rest. The duration column, really only use that if there's going to be some kind of change in the middle of the IEP year, or maybe the student's graduating at some point, but making sure the dates match up, and so there's no gaps in service time there. If in related services you have direct and consult, separate those on the line to make sure that it's clear what is direct and how much is consult, and just be sure that the logs match that. I would suggest having a log for consult and a log for direct services, so it's very clear if the student is getting what they're entitled to. ESY, another thing that could probably, I'm sorry, that's so blurry, but another area that could probably be a whole hour of its own training, but making sure that this information is based on data, on goals and objectives only. Are they making progress on their goals and objectives throughout the school year? Yes, then they probably don't need extended school year. If they're not, then you're going to identify what area they need that support. Something that some districts might say is using the second box for those initial IEPs or those move-in students, because you need to collect data on them. You might not know how they're doing on their IEP, so you might need to come back to that one. But if you do identify it, make sure you're using that consideration form to show the documentation of why they need it in what areas. And then work with your admin to figure out what that service will look like for ESY. If there's no areas, you could write a statement like this: the IEP determined that there are no concerns within the 3 domains of ESY. Then you list them. I would add that the IEP determined based on data that there are no concerns there. And I think this has been updated, but making sure that you have the correct code in there based on their hours. Assessments, just be mindful of what grade the student will be in, how the IEP year covers the assessment schedule. Like maybe they're a second grader right now, but by the time their IEP expires, they'll be a third grader and have taken the M-STEP. So the IEP should list as such. Any of those accommodations should be supported in the PLAF and related to those in the supplementary aids. District-wide assessments. List the content areas like reading or math, and not the specific NWA or iReady or something else, because your district might change what assessments they provide, and the student might change districts. So you want this to just show what they need. Sorry, Jenna, I just saw your question. Do you always need the Form 2 for ESY? Only if you are saying yes, or if you're doing a real dive into whether or not, like you're not sure, you're considering it, you got to look at it and you want to document it. So it's not an always, just like the AT form isn't an always, it's an optional add-on. But if you're going to say yes, I would have that as your documentation to prove the need. Alternate assessments, the state is really pushing that students aren't in the alt assessments. There's that new rubric out there that's pretty intense about having the most significant cognitive impairments. Those are the only students that should be taking the MyAccess, having significant cognitive impairments that is across all domains of life. So the message here is it's okay to take the M-STEP and struggle. But if you can fill out that rubric by saying that they have the most significant cognitive impairment, then they can take the alt assessment, and you need to describe why, which level, and the accommodations that also match from previous areas in the IEP. The WIDA, I would say just work with your multilingual consultants to ensure who your students might be. But hopefully this box will change in the future, but really you're only using this area if the student qualified within the last year for those services. Otherwise, it's going to be blank. People put accommodations and stuff in here, and you don't need to do any of that. It's just if the student was eligible or qualified for that in the last year, state what their criteria was. So again, work with your multilingual consultants there. Transportation, this is a section of the IEP that is changing and might have already changed, so look out for that. But here's some tips for making sure, like, you're checking, is it required or it's not? If it's not, it's something to consider adding to the options considered but not selected page on FAPE. And then, oh, my slides are a little out of order here, sorry. Initiation of your IEP, not before the offer of FAPE, but could be the same day. So if FAPE goes home today, then we could start services today. But if it goes home today, you start services tomorrow. But you can't have it services start tomorrow, and then the FAPE actually didn't get delivered. Notice a FAPE didn't get delivered until Friday. That won't be allowed. You can't start those services until that notice has been provided. It's got to be within 7 days of that meeting date. Usually, we're holding these until, keeping these open until the next IEP, but sometimes with some families, you're going to write, we're going to meet in 6 months, for whatever specific reason. And then we have our dissenting report indications down here, so that if there's anybody, you list them here, and if they have a report attached or not. Back to the changes to special ed transportation. So it's all about funding, I believe. So it's just a couple added check boxes. So identifying if they need it and why they need it, like it's medical or it's out of their attendance area. What type, we're going to be more specific about what type of bus or vehicle that they need. And is it corner to corner, curb to curb, door to door? So hopefully your directors are giving you some indication about how they want you to fill that out, or you're talking to your teams to anticipate how that will look for your students. Notice page. Okay, this page is so important and so underutilized. You want to indicate how it was provided to them at the top there in delivery mode and when it was given to them. But the most important part here is this options considered but not selected. So it's anything you discussed in the IEP, but meeting, but maybe didn't put in as a need that needs to be addressed. We were talking about ESY, assistive technology, communication, services, supplementary aids and services. Maybe they had extended time last year and they don't anymore. Why did that fall off? Or they had 3 hours of resource program and now they have 6. Why the increase? We considered 3, but we decided on 6. Tell me why. What is the data telling me? We thought about a goal in math, but she's not an LD math kid. She can be supported with in-class supports or something like that. Of course, another spot for LRE. I suggest starting this sentence for reason not selected with the IEP team determined, because that includes the whole team and the parent. I would continue with it based on data and either include the data or make sure you have the data available and giving a reason why these things weren't selected. Also, don't do what I did here and use ESY, spell it out for the parents, extended school year, assistive technology, or something like that. Avoid those acronyms. We really want to make sure the parents understand this notice. And then, of course, we're giving them the procedural safeguards, or we're checking the box that they've received it previously, but we got to make sure they're giving it once a year. And then somebody will sign as the superintendent or the designee. And of course, if it's an initial, and only if it's initial, parents will check to give consent or refuse consent for that initial provision of special ed programs. So if they say no, thank you, then the student is not eligible and you continue to service them or support them in different ways. All right, so now the paperwork is done. What do we do after the meeting? Of course, you're going to follow whatever procedures your district has laid out for you, but making sure that the IEP includes all of the documents that go with it, the last progress report, any teacher reports you gathered, updated behavior plans, procedural safeguards, healthcare plan, bus plan, anything that might go with that. Making sure that, parents have been provided that copy. Also that teachers are aware of, any changes if they, only one teacher came to the meeting and there's multiple teachers, getting that out to them. And then of course, making sure it's validated and finalized. Some districts have you upload into MiStar, or they have you place them in a different place. So I said I would share some other resources. Of course, our catalog is available online, so you can peruse that to see what PD we're offering. These training modules is where you will find more information on IEP rating and transition. Fair warning, they're a little old, but they still are serviceable. So that's there. And then of course, the IDEA website, MARS website, MDE, and then the Progress Center's IEP tip sheets are pretty nice as well. Okay, we don't have time for you to do this right now, but on your own later, take a moment and think about a traffic light and what you've learned today and think, okay, I'm going to stop doing that one thing in my IEPs. Name that for yourself. And maybe there was something that was affirming today, like, oh, I do that in my IEPs, that's good. And then hopefully you have at least one thing that is new that you're going to start when writing your IEPs in the future. And if you could take a screenshot of, or snip that QR code, and I'll put it in the chat here too. Just let me know some thoughts about today's very quick, fast run through of an IEP. We get an hour, so, got to go through it. Yes, it is recorded, and that will be up on Wayne RESA's YouTube at some point in the future. And if the slides aren't made available to you, please email me, and my email will come up soon. And I can send you the slides as well. I love this quote because I think it's so true in special education that our paperwork has paperwork. And it's not all that you do, but it is a lot that you do. And it's good to make sure it's right so that students are getting their entitlements. But I know that the real work is with the students. So I hope that you don't get too bogged down in all the paperwork, and have a great year with your kiddos. And then if you have any questions, again, reach out to your organization first to make sure you understand how you're supposed to do it in your district. But I am available. If you have questions, you can give me a shout via email, or you can find my phone number online if you want, but email will probably be better. So we are at 4:01. Our time is up, but I can stay on for a little bit if anybody has any questions. I think we're still going to have to do the chat though, because I don't know what's going on with my sound. So I'm going to hit stop recording, and I appreciate you and your time, and good luck with everything this year.